It started as a normal summer afternoon. My 12-year-old daughter was outside, wearing her favorite yellow t-shirt and shorts, riding her bike with her friends. She was laughing, enjoying the warm sun, just being a kid. Then Karen showed up, our HOA president. Red dress, sunglasses, that angry look she always had. She walked right up to my daughter and shouted, "Your clothes are inappropriate. You can't dress like that in this neighborhood." My daughter froze, confused and scared. She tried to explain, "It's just a t-shirt, ma'am." But Karen didn't care. She grabbed her by the arm and told her to go home and change right now, or face a fine. My wife ran out of the house yelling, "Let go of her, she's just a child." But Karen kept shouting about rules and neighborhood image. What she didn't know was that the little girl she just humiliated was the daughter of the police chief. Before the story unfolds, comment where you're watching from. And don't forget to follow for more real HOA stories where justice always wins. It started as a quiet summer afternoon, the kind of day where everything feels calm, the sky clear, the air warm, and the laughter of children fills the neighborhood like music. My 12-year-old daughter, Emma, was outside riding her pink bicycle, her yellow t-shirt bright under the afternoon sun, her hair tied in two little braids that bounced as she pedaled. She smiled as she rode in circles near the cul-de-sac, waving at her friends, laughing when her shoe slipped off a pedal. Her mother, Sarah, sat on the porch, a glass of lemonade in her hand, watching her with soft eyes, pride glowing on her face. Everything was perfect, peaceful, and ordinary until Karen appeared. Until that moment changed everything. Karen, the HOA president, always walked like she owned every inch of the neighborhood. She wore her red dress like a warning sign, her sunglasses reflecting the light, her clipboard clutched tight against her chest. She was always looking for something, anything, to complain about. And that afternoon she found her target. She stopped at the edge of our driveway, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement, her voice already raised, sharp and cold. "Your clothes are inappropriate for this neighborhood," she shouted, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "This is a family community. We have standards." Emma slowed down, confused, her little feet pressing against the pedals to stop her bike. She looked up, blinking in surprise, her small voice shaking when she said, "I'm just playing. It's just a t-shirt." Karen's lips tightened, her head tilting slightly in disgust. "It's too short, too bright, too much," she said, her tone filled with judgment. "Children should be dressed properly if they're going to be outside." Sarah stood up from the porch, placing her lemonade on the step. "Excuse me?" she said, her tone steady but her face already showing anger. "She's 12. She's a child, not a model. She's wearing normal clothes. It's summer." Karen didn't even look at her. She raised her clipboard and pointed toward the house. "Go inside and change," she ordered. "If she's going to play outside, she should wear something appropriate. Otherwise, I'll be forced to report you to the HOA." Sarah took a few steps forward, the porch creaking beneath her feet. "You can't talk to her like that. You can't tell my daughter what to wear," she said firmly. "She's not breaking any rules." Karen crossed her arms, her lips curling into a smirk. "Rules are rules," she said. "If you can't follow them, maybe you shouldn't be living here." Emma's face turned red. She looked at her mom, her eyes glassy with tears she was trying hard to hold back. She didn't understand why this woman was yelling at her for riding her bike, why something as simple as a t-shirt had turned into such a scene. She whispered, "Mom, did I do something wrong?" Sarah knelt beside her, wrapping her arms around her. "No, baby," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair away from her daughter's face. "You did nothing wrong." But inside her heart was pounding. The embarrassment, the anger, the disbelief, it all mixed together like fire spreading through her veins. Karen stood there, watching them with that same smug expression, tapping her clipboard as if she had just done something noble, as if shaming a child made her the hero of the neighborhood. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of Emma's small sobs. Finally, Sarah stood, her voice calm but cold. "You should leave," she said. "Right now." Karen raised an eyebrow. "Or what?" she said, her voice dripping with arrogance. Sarah didn't answer. She just stared back, her jaw tight, her hands shaking slightly. After a long pause, Karen huffed, turned around, and walked away. muttering something about people who don't respect rules. Her red dress fluttered behind her as she disappeared down the street, leaving behind the weight of her cruelty. Sarah helped Emma up, guiding her toward the house. "Come on, sweetie," she said softly. "Let's go inside." Emma sniffled, her voice barely a whisper. "Why is she so mean?" Sarah sighed. "Some people like to feel powerful by hurting others," she said quietly, "but she won't get away with it." As they reached the porch, Sarah glanced down the street one last time. She didn't notice my car turning the corner, didn't see me watching from a distance. I had just finished my shift and was heading home when I saw the way Karen had been pointing at my daughter, the way Emma stood there, shoulders shaking, face hidden in her hands. I parked the car quietly, my jaw tightening, my pulse quickening. I didn't need to hear the words to know what had happened. I could read the situation instantly. The tension in my wife's posture, the fear in my daughter's eyes, and the self-satisfied smirk on Karen's face. As I stepped out of the car, Karen's voice carried faintly through the air. "Rules are rules," she said again, loud enough to make sure my family heard her one last time. I walked toward them slowly, each step measured, my badge glinting slightly on my belt. She didn't notice me yet, too busy straightening her clipboard and pretending she'd done the right thing. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have understood, was that the girl she had just humiliated, the little girl she'd dared to shame in her own driveway, was my daughter. And I wasn't just any father, I was the police chief. And Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her life. When I got closer to the house, I could already tell something was wrong, the kind of wrong that you can feel in your gut before you even know the reason, the kind that tightens your chest and makes every step heavier, slower. My wife, Sarah, was crouched beside our daughter, Emma, who sat on the curb with her head buried in her arms, her shoulders shaking. The bicycle lay on the ground a few feet away, the front wheel still spinning slowly, creaking with every turn. Karen stood in front of them, arms folded, her clipboard pressed tight to her chest, her chin lifted like she was proud of herself. I parked the car and stepped out, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots breaking the silence. My uniform shirt still clung to me from the long shift I'd just finished, and my badge caught a bit of the afternoon light. I didn't say a word at first. I just stood there, watching, listening, feeling the tension swirl through the air like static. Sarah looked up when she saw me, her eyes red, her face tight with anger. Emma didn't look up. She just kept crying softly, her hands clutching the edge of her yellow shirt. Karen noticed me a second later. Her expression changed slightly, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face, but she straightened up quickly, putting on that false calm she always wore when she thought she was in control. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice sharp but rehearsed. "We were just discussing an HOA matter." "An HOA matter?" I repeated, my tone low, slow, careful. "You mean the matter where you yelled at a 12-year-old for wearing a t-shirt?" Karen adjusted her sunglasses and gave a thin smile. "Your daughter's attire violates the community standards outlined in Section 4, Paragraph 2, she said mechanically. "We maintain a certain image here and—" "Stop," I said quietly, my hand raising slightly, not to threaten, but to make her pause. "You're telling me you came here, to my driveway, and told my daughter what she can and can't wear?" Karen's lips twitched, but she didn't back down. "It's my job as HOA president to uphold the rules. I can't make exceptions just because she's a child." Sarah stood up, her voice trembling with emotion. "She grabbed her," she said. "She put her hand on her arm and told her to go inside. My daughter was terrified." Karen gave a small, dismissive laugh. "I didn't grab her," she said. "I merely guided her. Maybe you should teach her to respect authority instead of encouraging this kind of defiance." I looked at her for a long moment, saying nothing. My jaw tightened, my pulse steady but strong. Then I stepped closer, just enough for her to see the calm shift in my eyes, that quiet warning that every cop learns to carry when words are the only thing holding back fury. "Karen," I said softly, "you don't ever touch my daughter again. You don't talk to her like that, and you sure as hell don't make her cry in her own front yard." Karen blinked but stood her ground. "You're overreacting," she said, her tone rising slightly, that arrogance flaring up again. If you have an issue, take it up with the HOA board. I took another step forward, keeping my voice controlled. I am taking it up with the HOA board, I said. Starting with you? Her face stiffened. I was only enforcing the rules, she said. Everyone has to follow them. Even the police chief's family. That last sentence was meant to sting, but it only made me smile. The kind of smile that has no humor in it. The kind that makes people realize they've gone too far. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. You think this is about power, Karen, I said slowly. You think that because you have a title, you can control people, embarrass them, make them small. But there's something you forgot. She frowned slightly. And what's that? I leaned in just a little closer, enough for her to hear every word clearly. Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback ready. Behind me, Emma sniffled softly, and I turned to look at her. Her little hands were still shaking, and I felt something twist deep inside me. That helpless, burning guilt every father feels when his child has been hurt by something he couldn't stop in time. I knelt down beside her, my hand resting gently on her shoulder. Hey, I said quietly. You okay, sweetheart? She nodded slightly, but her voice came out in a whisper. She said I looked bad, Dad. She said people don't like how I dress. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them and smiled softly. You look perfect, I said. Don't you ever let anyone tell you different? Karen shifted her weight, clearly uncomfortable. She glanced at her clipboard, pretending to look busy. I'll just, leave this here, she said awkwardly, setting a folded notice on the porch step. I stood again, slowly, meeting her eyes. If I ever see you near my daughter again, I said. Each word careful, deliberate, quiet, you'll regret it. And I don't mean legally, I mean personally. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Fear, maybe, or realization. She straightened her shoulders, muttered something under her breath about unprofessional behavior, and walked away, her heels clicking like gunfire fading into the distance. I watched her go, my hands clenched into fists, my breathing slow but heavy. Sarah came up beside me, wrapping an arm around my back. She's not going to stop, is she? She asked softly. No, I said. Not until someone makes her. Emma looked up at me, eyes still wet, voice trembling. Are you mad at me, Dad? I shook my head immediately. No, honey, I said. I'm mad for you. That night, after I tucked her in, I sat in my office, the glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. The notice Karen had left sat on my desk, a thin piece of paper, a pathetic attempt at authority. I read it once, twice, then folded it neatly and set it aside. I opened my laptop and started typing. Complaint forms, legal procedures, documentation, all the tools I'd spent years mastering as a police officer. Karen wanted to play by the rules? Fine. I'd play. But I'd play better. Because this wasn't just about a t-shirt anymore. It was about respect, safety, and the one thing I'd sworn to protect, my family. And Karen had just declared war on the wrong man. The next morning started quietly but not peacefully. The sunlight came through the blinds, cutting thin, pale stripes across the living room wall, and the only sound in the house was the faint hum of the air conditioner and the slow tapping of my fingers on the kitchen table. I hadn't slept much, not after what had happened yesterday. The image of my daughter crying on the curb, clutching her shirt while that smug woman stood over her, kept replaying in my mind. Every time I thought about it, my jaw tightened, my chest burned a little hotter. Sarah came in, her hair still damp from the shower, holding a mug of coffee in both hands. She didn't say good morning. She didn't have to. We both knew it wasn't one. She sat across from me, the chair scraping lightly against the floor, and placed her phone on the table. You need to see this, she said quietly. I took the phone from her. It was an email, official looking, the HOA logo in the corner, the subject line bold and irritatingly neat, formal notice, violation of community dress code. My eyes skimmed down the message, reading faster with every line. Child of residents observed in non-compliant attire, bright colors, short hemline, and public visibility considered inappropriate for HOA standards. A fine of $150 will be applied to your account. Further violations may result in suspension of community privileges. At the bottom, in black text, was the signature I expected but still couldn't believe. Karen Matthews, HOA President. I stared at it for a moment, silent. Then I let out a low laugh, the kind that doesn't come from amusement but disbelief. She actually did it, I said. She's doubling down. Sarah sighed, her voice tight. She's still going after us, even after everything yesterday. She has no shame. I set the phone down, rubbed my temples, and took a deep breath. She doesn't think anyone can touch her, I said quietly. She's used to people rolling over. We're not doing that. By noon, we were in the car, the air thick with the kind of tension that doesn't need words. The HOA office wasn't far, just a small tan building with tinted windows and a flagpole out front. From the outside it looked harmless, almost boring. Inside, though, it reeked of control. Framed rules on the walls, printed notices pinned to cork boards, the smell of coffee that had been sitting too long. Karen was there, sitting behind a wide oak desk that looked far too important for someone with her job. Her red jacket was crisp, her hair perfectly combed, and her lips curved into that fake smile that barely hid the satisfaction behind it. She didn't even pretend to be surprised when she saw us. I was expecting you, she said, leaning back slightly in her chair. You can file an appeal, of course, but the fine still applies. That's standard policy. I didn't sit right away. I let a few seconds pass, just long enough for her to feel the weight of my silence. Then I pulled the chair out slowly and sat down across from her, my hands folded on the desk. Sarah stood beside me, arms crossed, her eyes fixed on Karen like she could burn a hole through her. Karen, I said finally, keeping my tone calm, steady, measured. You're harassing my family. Karen blinked, feigning innocence. Excuse me? You heard me, I said. This has nothing to do with community rules. You embarrassed a child for no reason. You grabbed her arm. You yelled at her in public. That's not enforcement. That's abuse of authority. Her smile didn't falter, but her voice got sharper. Oh, I see. The big police chief thinks he can intimidate me. I didn't move. I didn't blink. You have no idea what I think, I said slowly, each word deliberate. But I promise you, you'll regret making my daughter cry. For a moment, she looked caught off guard, her hand tightening slightly on her clipboard, her confidence wavering. But then she laughed lightly, as if trying to recover. You're overreacting, she said. You can't use your position to threaten me. I was just doing my duty. Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. Your duty? She said. To harass families? To scare children? To humiliate little girls for wearing bright clothes? Karen shrugged, flipping through a few papers. We all have to follow rules. If you don't like them, maybe you should move somewhere less organized. Something in me shifted then. Not rage exactly, but something colder, heavier, controlled. The kind of calm you only learn after years of facing danger. You think you're safe behind your rules, I said quietly. But you're not. She glanced up. Is that a threat? No, I said, my voice low. It's a promise. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to fade. Karen looked from me to Sarah, her fake smile slipping slightly. I stood, slow and steady, my chair scraping softly against the floor. You like rules, Karen, I said. You like paperwork, meetings, authority. Good. Because from this point forward, I'm going to bury you in it. You'll be dealing with real investigators, not your little HOA. I turned to Sarah. Let's go. As we walked out, I could feel Karen's eyes on me, that nervous, defiant stare of someone who finally realized they'd picked the wrong fight. By the time we got to the car, Sarah's hands were still shaking slightly. You're really going to report her? She asked. I nodded, my voice calm again. I already am. That night, after dinner, I sat in my home office with my laptop open, typing faster than I had in months. Complaint forms, statements, citations. Every line of text another nail in the coffin Karen had built for herself. I pulled up the HOA bylaws, every code, every rule, every legal loophole she had violated in her so-called enforcement. By the time the clock hit midnight, the file was 10 pages long. It wasn't anger that drove me anymore. It was precision. I'd spent years building cases, finding patterns, exposing lies. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was an abuser hiding behind a badge that meant nothing. I leaned back, cracked my knuckles, and looked at the final page on the screen. It read, "Complaint filed by Chief Daniel Hayes. Misuse of authority, harassment, defamation, and endangerment of a minor." I clicked send. Somewhere across town, Karen was probably sitting smug in her chair, sipping wine, thinking she'd won another small battle. But she didn't know the storm that was coming. Because when you cross a line that deep, when you target a child, when you try to humiliate an innocent girl, you don't just break rules. You wake up a man trained to fight. And I was done letting her play God in my neighborhood. I started the day by making a list, because lists keep chaos honest. I wrote down every complaint, every name, every date I could remember. Small things at first, a fine for a blue mailbox, a warning about a single wind chime. And then the pattern took shape: petty enforcement, personal attacks, a habit of singling out families who didn't bow. The more I dug, the clearer it became that Karen wasn't enforcing rules, she was wielding them like a weapon. I knocked on doors, one after another, in the heat of morning and the thin cool of evening, and people opened with the wary eyes of someone expecting a sales pitch and finding an ally instead. Mr. Alvarez handed me a folder with 3 notices and a calendar he'd kept of fines, his hands trembling a little as he pushed the pages across his kitchen table. "She said our blue hydrangeas were low class," he muttered, and then looked at me like he hadn't realized he could ever air that out loud. Mrs. Jensen, who had lived on the street for 30 years, pulled out an email chain with Karen's voice sharp and small and black and white, demanding conformity and threatening penalties. A teenager showed me a shaky video from a doorbell cam, where Karen shoved a delivery driver because the box had been left on the wrong side of a stoop. Each story was small, humiliating, and familiar. Each one completed the picture of a woman who had confused order with control. I logged everything. I recorded names, dates, times, witnesses. I saved screenshots, emails, messages, the little digital footprints people leave when they complain or confess or beg for help. I learned to build patience into evidence, because anger makes you sloppy, and sloppiness gives lawyers and bullies room to breathe. I called a friend in internal affairs and asked a favor without drama. He suggested language I could use, the right way to phrase complaints so they couldn't be easily brushed aside. He offered to forward a detective to look at the case once we had enough. By midweek, the file on my laptop had swelled. It wasn't only my daughter's incident anymore. It was a web, petty fines, repeated warnings to the same households, forged signatures on complaint forms in one case, and the HOA's own minutes showing strange votes and missing records. I found out the HOA used a third-party management company that was lax about oversight, and that laxness had let Karen operate in the cracks. Some people were afraid to speak because she threatened to fine them, others because she had the habit of publicly shaming people at board meetings. It was the same tactic everywhere: isolate, intimidate, immobilize. I asked neighbors if they would sign statements, and they did, slowly at first, then in little waves. The first few were hesitant, fingers worrying the edges of paper. By the time I left the 8th house that afternoon, people were handing me printed copies and telling me what they'd always wanted to say aloud. "We were scared of escalation," one woman said, "but we're more scared of her staying in power." A retired schoolteacher said she'd watched families move away because of the stress. Small admissions, but together, they felt like a map leading to the truth. I took the evidence to the detective my friend had promised. He met me in a parking garage, awkward and precise, and we spoke in clipped sentences over the hum of passing cars. He examined the files, nodded at the pattern, and agreed to open a preliminary inquiry. He asked me to leave copies of everything with the station and not to publicize details. "We'll take it from here," he said, which is the first time I felt a sliver of relief. It's different to fight alone than to point a problem at someone whose job it is to make the law do its work. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday, and I decided to go in uniform. I wanted to make the point that this was not a private vendetta. Community safety and civil standards matter. The boardroom smelled of lemon cleaner and old coffee, fluorescent lights buzzing over a long table where people sat with papers in front of them like shields. Karen arrived late, in red as always, and the air in the room tightened when she walked in. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She was used to the ritual: stand, claim authority, demand compliance. Only this time the faces around the table looked less cowed and more curious. I asked to speak, and the chair let me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flash a badge for effect. I set the file down, pushed it forward like a fact, and watched the room draw breath. "This meeting," I said, "is about accountability." I laid out the evidence piece by piece, calmly, methodically. Emails, photos, witness statements, the list of fines that didn't add up, the video clips from doorbell cameras. I watched the color drain from Karen's face as each paper landed on the table. She tried to talk over me, to frame it as a misunderstanding, to invoke bylaws and community standards, but the chorus of corroborations made noise into meaning. One by one, people who had once been silent raised their hands or simply spoke. The treasurer admitted he had been pressured into approving certain fines without following protocol. A board member confessed she had felt bullied into supporting decisions. The room, at first politely formal, slipped into a different gravity. The HOA's veneer, thin and brittle, cracked. Karen's composure faltered. She mouthed excuses that dissolved when I placed the video of her shove on the table. It played, embarrassing and undeniable. There was no spin that turned that moment into anything other than what it was. When the board called for votes, the result was decisive. The motion to remove Karen from any enforcement role passed unanimously, and the board agreed to suspend her until an independent review could be completed. It was a practical, legal pummeling, small bureaucratic steps that added up to real consequences. I kept my face neutral, though satisfaction like heat moved through me. I had no wish to relish someone's fall, only to see fairness returned. After the meeting, questions still buzzed like flies. Some neighbors asked if we should press criminal charges. Some wondered about civil suits or demands for restitution. The detective's office had already begun its own quiet work. They called 2 residents in for interviews the following day. The HOA hired a consultant to audit their procedures, and the management company announced policy changes. Small victories, procedural and slow, but tangible. The kind of incremental justice that accumulates and eventually protects others from the same harm. At home that night, the house felt quieter, as if the weight of a whole tense week had been lifted a fraction. Emma rode her bike in the driveway again, smaller circles this time, a tentative smile returning. Sarah made dinner with hands that didn't tremble as much. We did not celebrate. We did not pretend everything had been erased. Instead, we sat down and made plans, statements to file, a neighborhood meeting to encourage witness cooperation, a conversation with the HOA about safeguards against future abuses. The work wasn't over, but the direction was clear. I slept badly that night, the residue of stress keeping me restless, but I slept with the comfort that procedures could be trusted when staffed by people who remember the difference between rules and cruelty. The evidence had been gathered, the board had acted, and the police had taken up the thread. Karen would have to answer for what she had done, in court or in community restitution, or both. That knowledge settled in me like a cold certainty. The point wasn't punishment for its own sake. It was the restoration of a neighborhood's safety, the reaffirmation that small cruelties can be brought to light, and that when people finally speak up together, power loses its solitary edge. I'd built cases in darker places, and held truth like a tool. Here, in the quiet cul-de-sac where my daughter rode her bike, that same method, careful, unglamorous, relentless, had been enough to change what people allowed to be normal. We moved forward, step by step, paperwork by paperwork, meeting by meeting, because justice is often a series of small, stubborn acts over time. The neighbors who had once whispered now volunteered to host a street picnic, to bring their kids out again without fear. It won't be perfect, and scars remain, but the lines are clearer now. Rules protect, authority serves, and anyone who forgets that will be seen for what they are. The meeting ended, but the silence that followed stayed heavy in the air, thick and strange, like the aftermath of a storm that hadn't quite finished clearing. Papers were scattered across the table, pens lay forgotten, and the smell of burnt coffee hung in the corner like stale guilt. Karen sat still, her once perfect posture now slumped. The red jacket that had always made her look so sure of herself, now just another color fading under fluorescent lights. I stayed there for a moment longer, watching the faces around the room, reading the small twitches of relief, the quiet glances between neighbors who had finally seen the truth they were too afraid to name. When I walked outside, the air felt different, cooler, cleaner. Sarah was waiting near the car, her arms folded but her shoulders relaxed in a way I hadn't seen for weeks. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice soft but cautious, as if she didn't quite believe it yet. I nodded once, slow, still trying to process what it meant to finally be done. "They voted her out," I said. "She's finished." Sarah exhaled, a long, trembling breath that sounded like release. We drove home in silence for a while, the streetlights flashing rhythmically across the windshield, the city quiet in that half-awake state between day and night. I thought about Emma, about the way her face had lit up when she'd told me she wanted to wear bright colors to school again, about the sound of her laughter that had been missing for too long. I thought about the neighborhood, the people who had stepped forward, the ones who hadn't, and the strange, fragile balance between fear and courage that always defined communities. When we turned into our street, the cul-de-sac looked softer somehow, ordinary again. A few porch lights were still on, a dog barked in the distance, the hum of sprinklers filled the gaps between sounds. Emma was already asleep when we got home, her favorite stuffed bear tucked under her arm, her hair messy from dreaming. I stood in her doorway for a long time, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the tiny motion that meant everything was still all right. Downstairs, Sarah was sitting on the couch, the television on mute, the glow flickering faintly across her face. She looked up when I sat beside her, and for a while neither of us said anything. The exhaustion was heavy but good, the kind that came with the knowledge that something wrong had been made right, at least for now. "Do you think she'll try anything else?" Sarah finally asked. I shook my head. "She'll have to answer to more than us now," I said. "The investigation's not over. The board's filed an official complaint. She's out of power, and without that, she's nothing." Sarah nodded slowly, tracing the edge of the mug in her hands. "I still don't understand how someone could do that to a child," she said, her voice catching slightly. "To think she was helping by hurting people." I looked at her, the tiredness in her eyes mirrored in mine. "Some people don't want to help," I said quietly. "They just want control. They hide behind rules because rules make them feel bigger. It's not about order, it's about fear, theirs and everyone else's." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat like that, listening to the steady hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the house settling, the distant sound of a car passing somewhere beyond the street. The quiet felt strange but earned. The next morning, sunlight came in through the blinds, sharp and gold, filling the living room with warmth. Emma ran in barefoot, her laughter back, her hair wild, her voice bright again. She wanted to ride her bike. Sarah hesitated at first, a mother's instinct still raw, but I nodded. "Go ahead," I said. "You're safe." Outside, the street looked ordinary again. Kids playing, sprinklers running, the faint smell of cut grass in the air. Karen's house sat at the far end of the block, her car gone, her windows dark. A moving truck was parked 2 houses away, the logo of some relocation company half peeled on the side. I didn't need to ask who was moving. By midday, word had spread. Neighbors who had once whispered now spoke openly, relief mixing with shame that it had taken so long. The HOA posted a notice about new leadership, about rebuilding trust, about restoring a sense of community. Words that meant little, but at least they were words heading in the right direction. I went for a walk that evening, the kind of quiet patrol that wasn't really about protection, but about reflection. The sky was dimming into amber, and the air smelled like rain even though the clouds held. I stopped by the park where Emma had learned to balance without training wheels, the same park where Karen had once shouted about noise levels and grass damage. It was peaceful again, just the sound of wind in the trees and the squeak of a swing someone had left moving. When I got back home, Sarah was setting the table, humming softly under her breath. Emma was coloring at the kitchen counter, a streak of marker across her cheek. For a moment it felt like life had returned to something normal, fragile but real. Later, after dinner, I went to the porch and sat in the dark with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. The world outside felt small again, safe. But I knew that safety wasn't something you earned once. It was something you had to guard every day. The same way I guarded the people I loved. The same way I'd guard the peace that had taken so long to rebuild. I thought about Karen, about the look on her face when the vote came down, about how quickly arrogance collapses when truth finally stands tall. I didn't feel joy or victory, only a deep, steady calm. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. I stood up, stretched, looked toward the dark end of the street where the lights didn't reach. Somewhere out there, people like her would always exist. The ones who mistake power for strength, who think control equals respect. But here, in this small place, under this quiet sky, she had lost. And as I closed the door, the house warm and full of breath behind me, I realized something simple and final. She would never take another ounce of peace from my family again. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, the noise that once filled our home, the chaos, the fear, the tension, began to fade into something softer, something almost peaceful. The morning light felt warmer now, the air lighter. The smell of pancakes filled the kitchen again, the kind of ordinary calm that had been missing for too long. I sat at the table, coffee in hand, watching Sarah move around the kitchen, humming under her breath. Emma was in the yard, laughing again, the sound clear, high and full, the kind of sound that used to mean safety before everything went dark. It had been months since the day that changed everything, but healing doesn't come in big moments. It sneaks in quietly, one small piece at a time. Outside, the neighborhood had changed too. The streets that once felt like a trap now looked open, familiar. People waved more, stopped to talk, asked about Emma. The same neighbors who had looked away when things got bad now looked us in the eyes again. Ashamed maybe, but trying to make it right. The HOA had new members, new rules, real fairness. Karen's name was gone from every sign, every letterhead, every piece of paper that used to carry her power. It was like she'd never existed, and yet, her shadow lingered in small ways. The caution in people's voices, the quiet that fell when someone mentioned the old days. Emma's recovery had been slow. The first few weeks after the accident, she couldn't even look at her bike. It sat in the garage collecting dust, a silent reminder of fear. But one morning she asked me to take it out. "I want to try again," she said, her voice small but steady. I remember tightening the bolts, checking the tires, my hands shaking more than hers. I walked beside her as she pedaled, my hand hovering over her shoulder just in case. She wobbled, stopped, started again. And when she finally found her balance, when she rode down the street with her hair flying and laughter spilling out, I felt something inside me unclench. She was free again, in the simplest, purest way. I'd thought about Karen sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with a strange, quiet pity. People like her live in a cage of their own making. Control becomes their air, and when it's taken away, they can't breathe. The police investigation had gone through. She'd been charged with harassment, endangerment, and falsifying HOA records, community service, probation, public apology. The system did what it could, though it never feels like enough when you're the one left with scars. Still, I didn't need her punishment to feel like justice. I just needed my family safe, my daughter happy, my wife able to sleep again without flinching at every sound outside. One evening, the mail came later than usual. Sarah brought it in, a small stack of envelopes. Bills, flyers, the usual clutter. But at the bottom was one without a return address. No stamp either. Hand-delivered. I opened it carefully, the paper slightly crumpled, the handwriting uneven. There were only 3 words, "I'm sorry. K." I read it twice, then set it down on the counter. Sarah looked at me, her eyes searching. "It's her, isn't it?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said. "It's her." Sarah didn't say anything after that, just reached out and took my hand. We didn't talk about it again. Some things didn't need words. Some apologies don't erase pain, but they acknowledge it. And sometimes that's enough to close a door quietly instead of slamming it. A few days later, Emma came running inside, breathless and laughing. "Dad, come see," she shouted. I followed her out to the yard, the sun low and golden. She was riding her bike again, faster this time, her pink helmet shining under the light. "Look, Dad, no hands," she yelled, her grin wide, fearless. I froze for a second, instinct, but then I smiled. "That's my girl," I said quietly, pride catching in my throat. Sarah joined me on the porch, her hand slipping into mine. We stood there, side by side, watching our daughter ride in circles, the sound of her laughter cutting through the quiet. "She's happy again," Sarah whispered, her voice soft, full. "She deserves this," I said. "She earned it." As the sun dipped below the trees, the sky turned orange and pink, a color that looked like peace. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe fully. The fear that had wrapped itself around my chest loosened, the memories still there but duller now, like old scars you can touch without pain. When night came, I tucked Emma into bed. She hugged her stuffed bear, the one she'd clung to during the worst of it, the one that still had a small rip at the seam from that day. "Good night, Daddy," she whispered, her eyelids heavy. "Good night, sunshine," I said, brushing her hair back, my voice steady. Downstairs, I poured myself a glass of water and looked out the window. The street was quiet, the world calm. The porch light glowed faintly, catching the edges of the mailbox where, not long ago, letters of threats and fines had once come. Now it was just mail, ordinary, unimportant, blessedly normal. I thought again of that note, the shaky handwriting, the guilt behind it. Maybe it was real remorse, maybe it was fear of consequences, maybe both. But for the first time, I didn't care why. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done letting that woman, that moment define us. Because in the end, what mattered wasn't her punishment. It was this: the sight of my wife laughing again, the sound of my daughter's bike tires on the pavement, the steady heartbeat of a house filled with life, not fear. As I turned off the lights, I looked once more at Emma's picture on the wall. Her gap-toothed smile, her eyes wide and bright. And I felt the kind of peace that doesn't come from victory, but from survival. Karen had thought she could take control, take peace, take power that didn't belong to her. But in trying to hurt a child, she'd only revealed how small she really was. I closed the window, locked the door, and whispered under my breath the truth that had carried me through every dark hour since that day. You don't mess with a child's innocence, and you never, ever mess with a Navy SEAL's family.